Welcome, everybody. My name is Zoe Van Gelder. I've been a reporter with Public Square Amplified for almost 2 years now, and we are proud to be a co-sponsor with NJ Urban News for tonight's public conversation with Lawrence Hamm and Annette Alston on their newly released book, quote, A Life in the Struggle. Welcome to those of you here at Universalist Unitarian Congregation at Montclair, and to everybody on Zoom. Let me say a very heartfelt thank you to the UUCM for having us in their space once again. What we have tonight is what we believe to be a thoughtful program, one that demands that we think critically about the role and value of protest movements and of journalism in telling the story about them. From Newark to Gaza and from Trenton to Kinshasa, the world is demanding stories that center justice and the voices of those marginalized by might. And as today is International Women's Day, I'm asking everybody in the reach of my voice to call for an end to all wars, to end the violence against women from Haiti, Palestine, Congo, Ukraine, Mexico, and so many other places. I say that we honor women by ending the wars waged against them. Our goal tonight is a simple one: to use this book's text, its story, and its background to help us as young journalists and community members better understand what we at Public Square Amplified call liberatory or emancipatory journalism. How journalists must tell stories that center the community and activist voice. So what do I mean by that? I mean that myself, as a young journalist, I'm learning to tell stories grounded in historical context and social justice movements. For if we are to be worthy storytellers, we must do so by understanding power centers. And for us as community reporters, the community and activist voice is a power center, and it's one that we, as Public Square Amplified, try to amplify. Mr. Hamm is such a voice. Lawrence Hamm, a candidate in New Jersey's Democratic primary for the U.S. Senate in 2020 and 2024, has been involved in every major social movement in this state for the last 50 years. Hamm was inspired to become a community activist because of the example internationally known as a playwright, poet, and activist, Amiri Baraka. A graduate of Princeton University, he was part of the student leadership cadre that had a major campus anti-apartheid protest in the 1970s, years before the anti-apartheid movement became dominant across American campuses. He founded the People's Organization for Progress in 1983. POP, or POP, an independent grassroots organization, became a recognized leader in New Jersey's anti-apartheid and Million Man March movements. A proud father of 3 daughters who are at Rutgers graduates, he has been involved in fighting for quality education, employment opportunities, and access to health care, and against racial profiling and police brutality. Annette Alston is also such a voice. Miss Alston is an award-winning writer based in Newark, New Jersey. Her book, Harriet Tubman for Beginners, has received national recognition. Her 3-part series on the 25th anniversary of the Newark Rebellion was printed in the New York Amsterdam News and the Newark City News, where it won the NNPA Merit Award, among the highest honors for journalism in the Black press. A retired Newark public school teacher in primary and secondary education, she is a former leader of the Newark Education Association Union and stalwart member of the People's Organization for Progress and her South Ward-based church, Greater Life Ministries. She has a bachelor's degree in journalism from Rutgers, New Brunswick, and a master's degree in social studies, teacher education from Concordia University in Portland. And in addition to that impressive introduction, she's also a cat lover, with her first book, Sherry Berry, The Scritch Scratch Cat, as a fictional children's book about her first cat. And tonight, these incredible voices will be centered by my boss and mentor, the award-winning journalist, editor, and co-manager of Public Square Amplified, Emma Uck. She's an award-winning journalist based in New Jersey, where she was born and raised. She writes for local news outlets across New Jersey covering public education, public health, city government, land use, climate change, and environmental justice. She's won awards for her work in local news from the Center of Cooperative Media and for her coverage of cities and suburbs in the New Jersey Society of Professional Journalists. Emma has led and helped build the newsroom at Public Square Amplified while mentoring young community reporters like myself. She is an avid movie lover and researcher, passionate about storytelling and accountability in journalism, shedding light on critical topics such as social and economic injustice, racial inequity and inequality, and environmental justice. She graduated from Columbia University with a BA in English. Emma will hold the floor with Mr. Hamm and Ms. Alston, and then we will invite reporters from NJ Urban News to join in on a Q&A, and then we will take questions from the Zoom and the audience who is here in the sanctuary. Mr. Hamm does have to leave us by 6:15 p.m., and we are very grateful for his time, as well as everybody else's. Please help yourself to refreshments made possible by donations to Public Square Amplified. Thank you so much, and Emma, I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Zoe. It's always a pleasure working with you in the newsroom. So, welcome, Larry. Welcome, Annette. I want to say that I immensely enjoyed this book. I learned so much from it, and I have so many favorite parts. You should have saw my original list of questions that span pages, but I narrowed it down, so don't panic. So today is International Women's Day. And with that, I do want to say, like, ceasefire now. We do need a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Absolutely. And I feel like, if we're going to celebrate women today, that includes all women around the world, including the Palestinian women in Gaza. So I just wanted to say that, ceasefire now. But in honor of International Women's Day, I wanted to start with you, Annette. So why did you volunteer to work on this book, and why did you urge Larry to write it?
I've known Larry for many years. And worked with People's Organization for Progress, was a member of People's Organization for Progress, had opportunity to go with him to various speaking engagements that he would go to. Yeah. And I was always intrigued by the stories I heard at the various engagements, and felt that his story really needed to be told. I have another friend who's also a journalist, and we both talked about that. We had a discussion about his story needs to be told. It's time. Yeah. And Todd Stephen Burrows, he hates me bringing up his name, but I bring it up all the time because really he was a big help in this book. Yeah. And we said, it's just time. His story needs to be told. And, people need to understand what struggle looks like, what a movement looks like, what organizing really is, yeah. A true organizing. And Larry is a true organizer, from grassroots organizer. That's what he's done his entire life. And people need to understand what that is so that the next generation can learn from that and yeah. Move on.
Yeah. That's a great point. And that's one thing about the book. I feel like there's like stories within stories, and there's just so much to learn from it. So Larry, this is a new seat for me. Usually I'm running alongside you on the streets, trying to record you or get a quote from you. And I'm always honored each moment that I get to do that, and as I am now. So I wanted to ask you, what prompted you to write this book and to tell your story?
Well, Annette Alston prompted me to write this book. And the truth of the matter is, it is as much her book as it is mine, because had she not pushed me and put up with my cantankerous personality, it would have never happened. And one of the things I want to say about this book, and your opening comments prompted this thought. First of all, I want to say happy Women's History Month and International Women's Day, and I too support ceasefire in Gaza. But one of the things I think you will find when reading this book is the role that women have played in my life, and that the role women have played in organizing these many struggles that I have been in throughout my life. And I think anyone, although it may not be stated in the opening of the book. I think after you read the book, you'll see that from beginning to end, from the first protest at Arts High School, the anniversary of which is this month, March of 1971, until right up to the point where the book ends, women played not just an important but a critical role in many of these organizing struggles.
Yeah.
So Annette Alston prompted me to write it. People have been saying to me over the years, from the time I was appointed to the Board of Education, that I should write a book. So Annette was the midwife, you know, and I was proud to work with her. I have a whole new perspective on book writing now. It was really tough. I think this book was like 4 years in the making, but longer than that. And but it wouldn't have happened without Annette Alston. And it wouldn't have happened without the members of the People's Organization for Progress. Much of this book parallels the development of POP because many of those struggles took place. And so reading this book, you also read the story of People's Organization for Progress.
Yeah. You know, and that's one of the things, like, you even mentioned, like, the Million Man March and how, like, the women played a big role in organizing that. You know, and that's one of the things that I really liked about this book. It's just, I mean, there are a lot of things to like, but it's, like, the historical part. There's so much history, and, like, history in New Jersey that, like, I never knew about. Like, I didn't know there was such a rich history of, like, anti-apartheid movements in New Jersey, and you were a part of, like, the early wave of movements that was happening. And, you know, I feel like we can't understand where we are now without knowing our past.
Absolutely.
And I feel like the media often misses that, the historical context.
Right.
You know, like, I mean, among other things, but, you know, how we got here, why things are the way they are. And so there's a lot to learn from this book and also our past. And I was wondering, Annette, like, was there anything surprising you learned while writing this book?
That's a good question. And I can't think of anything offhand that surprised me. Oh, yeah. One of my favorite parts of the book is when he, as a teenager in high school, trained to. It's actually one of my favorite stories in it. When he trained to run basically
track,
to run, but not even to the marathon point. He was doing the 2 miler, runs, and how he, you know, was really slow at first and had been lapped like a few times before, and how he built himself up and he trained and he really strategized and thought about how he was going to get better, really. And it wasn't really so much about beating anyone else as it was, I think, just improving himself and being a better runner.
Yeah.
And he turned out to train to the point where he was the best.
Yeah.
And to the point where he was actually surprising other people. That's actually one of my favorite parts of it. And when I saw, you know, it really tells about him and how when he puts his mind to something and he wants to, you know, to get something done, how he has always, you know, found a way to do it, and not only just do it, but do it extremely well.
Yeah.
And and it was really kind of a lesson, I think, to young people and to everyone as well. You know, when you run, it's best to run against the person who's really good, the best. You wouldn't run against the best, it's going to make you better,
That's right.
if nothing else. And so I thought that was a really, really good story.
Yeah, it was.
Was
I was
fun.
really surprised because you say, like, you were not good at all, and then you became, like, one of the best.
I was not athletic at all. I
Yeah.
was not good in any sport.
Yeah, it gave me some hope because I'm not athletic at all. So, you know, maybe I could build myself up. But, so like I said earlier, there were a lot of passages and parts in the book that I really liked. And there's one passage in particular that I wanted to mention. It has to do with the story of Earl Faison. And that's the thing about this book too. There's stories within stories in this book, just so many movements, so many things you've been a part of. And for anybody who doesn't know, Earl Faison, He's a 27-year-old black man. He was an aspiring musician, and he was killed or like murdered in police custody. And that was April 19th, 1999. And one of the judges called it like a stairwell of torture. So, you know, but in this passage you say, quote, Earl Faison taught us, we learned how difficult it is to get justice within the criminal justice system. It is very difficult to convict police. There are all kinds of ways to subvert the system. Money, having the state on their side, police are officers of the state, means they can and do routinely escape the same punishments that regular citizens would get. Every once in a blue moon, somebody in blue is convicted. This is why, credited or not, struggle is imperative. And then a little while later you say, do we really understand that sustained change takes place only over the course of a protracted struggle?
Mm-hmm.
And when I read that, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here, and there's a lot that made me, I was thinking about a lot of things, but, you know, do you have any comments on that passage, or, you know, what does it mean to live a life in the struggle?
Well, the struggle for justice for Earl Faison was transformative. It was transformative for the People's Organization for Progress as a group, but it was also transformative for many of us as individuals. Up until that point, POP had primarily been a kind of educational organization. Like, most of our activities were indoors, forums and programs and discussions and debates, and every now and then we would go out to support other folks' struggle. The Faison episode dragged us into the street and kept us in the street. And we remain in the street to this day. And I think one of the fundamental lessons here is how important popular mobilization is for reform. Popular mobilization puts the pressure on. But that pressure is like the pressure that must be applied to coal in order to turn it into diamonds. It must be sustained over a long period, because the institutions and the processes that we struggle against are very entrenched and very powerful. I mean, and you're not going to change them in a day, in a week. It took us 4 years to get the police into jail. And then they didn't even go to jail for murder. They only went to jail for the federal charges for civil rights violations and conspiracy, because they tried to cover it up. We still consider the case of Earl Faison to be open today, just like Emmett Till, because the state of New Jersey failed. Murder is a state charge. Homicide is a state statute. And the state of New Jersey, through its representative, the county prosecutor, never launched an investigation for homicide. Never, to this day. But a man was killed in the Orange police station. And we feel that it's an unfinished quest for accountability. In most of these cases, people get a modicum of justice. They don't get full justice. Most of the time, families get a civil damages. They get money on the civil side. But as far as the officers going to jail, or it does happen, but it's very rare. So to get justice, you have to understand it's a protracted struggle and it takes time.
Yeah, and that was my sense of it, is that, you know, it's something you're in for the long run. You know, things aren't going to happen overnight. And it's so important and imperative that it's like you can't leave it. You know, and when I was reading that, it reminded me of something that Todd Stephen Burrows actually shared with me. And he's an editor of the book too, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so he's also a contributing writer for Public Square Amplified. But he shared something with me a few weeks ago. And it was written by a journalist. Her name is Barbara Ehrenreich. Mm-hmm. And it was actually an address to journalism graduates. And the way she describes like journalists and journalism and like, you know, like our role, it was very similar to how you just described like the struggle. And I thought that was really interesting. Mm-hmm. And she says like, where like despite everything, right, the media is dying, there's mass layoffs, we're underpaid, she says like, we can't stop doing what we do. As long as there is a story to be told, an injustice to be exposed, a mystery to be solved, we will find a way to do it. A recession won't stop us, a dying industry won't stop us, even poverty won't stop us, because we are all on a mission here. That's the meaning of your journalism degree. Do not consider a certificate promising some sort of entitlement. Consider it a license to fight. And when reading your book, I noticed that the media, it does come up a lot, not always positive, because the media has its issues for sure. But it was interesting to see where journalism and activism sort of intersect, and like the relationship that you've had with like the media. And I was wondering, has that changed over time? And like, why do you think that is? And is there anything like in the media that, either of you think, they should change or they should do better?
Annette, you want to go take a...
Well, actually, I kind of think that you would answer that better because you're dealing directly with
Okay.
the media. But yeah, I know that since he started running as senator, U.S. Senate, that relationship has changed a bit, maybe. And I also know that, journalists, depending on the situation, they have to maintain their the word I'm looking for starts with, there you go. But
Like they have to be like
Objectivity,
objective, they have
thank
to
you.
kind of like separate
they have
themselves.
to,
Yeah.
they have to, I get these
Yeah.
moments, but they have to keep their objectivity, and so they kind of distance themselves somewhat, though they might understand and be with them in terms of what we're fighting for, But it's important to cover material objectively because you want everyone to understand, and you don't want anyone to think, okay, they're just the mouthpiece for, So
Yeah.
the job of the journalist really should be to just get the information out there
Yeah.
and let people know what's happening and how people are being impacted.
Yeah.
And as a journalist, if you're doing that, you're doing you're doing your part. You're doing what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
In the struggle for justice, the role of journalism cannot be overemphasized. The dialectical relationship between the people who are fighting and the journalists who are covering it is an inescapable one. The role of the journalist is to bring to light how people are fighting, what they are doing, why they are fighting. It's like the anecdote about if a tree falls in the forest, do you hear it? The journalist is the one who lets you know the tree has fallen. That's why, like in the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, absolutely critical to democracy. Freedom of assembly and freedom of speech, freedom of the press. You see, they're all together in the Bill of Rights. Because why do we have that Bill of Rights? That Bill of Rights came out of the struggle of the American Revolution and the struggle to form the new nation. And those who founded this country, absolutely understood the role of the press. That's why in the Constitution itself, it talks about the establishment of a postal service. Why would it be government run? So that people could freely send out information, send out their broadsheets at that time. I don't know if they had newspapers as such, but they had these broadsheets they would send out, like the Federalist Papers and other things. So, yes, journalists have to have a certain degree of objectivity, but if nobody is covering it, why did we know so much about Dr. King? Because Dr. King was being covered by the press. People were sent from the north to the south to actually stay with Dr. King and go wherever he was going, cover the civil rights struggles. So journalism is absolutely critical. But at the same time, you know, there are problems with how people's struggles are covered. And journalists have to understand that they bring a certain bias with them, their own personal bias, but they also bring an institutional bias. I mean, we learn these things in pop, you know, how a journalist could write a good story, but then an editor can rearrange that story, and we're reading this, we're like, we were not here.
Yeah.
This is somewhere else, you know. So there's a lot to be said.
Yeah.
I want to add to this, too. There's a lot of focus on our democracy and the fact that, but what the founders understood is that democracy is dependent on an educated electorate, right? And so if you don't have an educated electorate, you really can't have a democracy. And I think we're going through that now. So the job of the journalist really is to educate as well, to educate the populace and let them know what's going on. So if they're getting miseducated or they're missing stuff, they're not really getting educated, then our democracy is in danger. And right now, our democracy is in danger because there is so much misinformation out there, or people are just good with being ignorant. You know, and it's just, and not following what's going on and not doing the research or doing the reading and following the news. And so, you know, that's where we are right now. I think democracy is dependent on journalism, good journalism.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said before, it was interesting seeing like the media coming up, like in your book, like with the Million Man March, you know, they tried to kind of like put a negative spin on it. And even with the Earl Faison case, like you mentioned a journalist that like, he was like the first person to ask you like the question of like, you know, why is it only these 4 officers that are being like investigated when there are plenty of other people involved?
That was Kevin Dilworth
Yes, yes.
who asked me that. I'll never forget it.
Yeah.
Because it gave me, because I hadn't considered this. I didn't know, you know, because the journalists, because of their investigative work, may know more than the activists knew. And Dilworth asked me at one point in the Faison case, he said there were at least 21 officers involved in the Faison situation that night. How come only 5 of them have been indicted? And in fact, the acting police director, because the police director, Conti, had to step down. And then a black officer was appointed as police director. And he went before the city council. He asked for a major appropriation because even he thought he was going to lose a dozen or more of his officers behind this.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen. They went after 5, and I guess, you know, the federal prosecutors tend to be more conservative. They usually don't take a case unless they think they're going to win it, and they only really zero in on those parts that seem certain. And so I guess they thought these 5, you know, we could get, but Dilworth said there were more officers involved that night.
You see, and like like asking the hard questions, looking into things, investigating. You know, I feel like that's like a critical part of journalism. You know, and like you said, like you know, you weren't aware, like that's kind of like symmetry and like between journalism and activism. I just found fascinating. But you know, as a writer and journalist, you know, what was the biggest obstacle you faced when writing this story, and how did you overcome
Larry
it?
Hamm. He was the biggest obstacle.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and Larry is so busy. I mean, really, just trying to keep up with him, you have to be able to run a marathon, to be honest. And so that was probably the biggest challenge, to be honest. Just getting him to sit in one place long enough to, you know, I mean, actually, the beginning part wasn't as bad. The recordings, he likes to talk. So the getting the recordings and everything, you know, that wasn't so bad. it was just sitting down with him and going through, what we had written and, making sure that everything was basically being said the way he wanted it to be said and, that sort of thing. That part was a bit of a challenge.
Is it harder, like, writing a book with somebody versus, like, on your own? Or is it
It probably depends on who you're writing
who you're
with.
writing with?
But it was, I'm going to be honest, I was honored to have the opportunity to write this story.
Yeah.
Very honored.
Yeah.
And because I know all that he's done, and the sacrifices that he's made along the way. So, yeah, I was definitely honored to be able to do it. I just had to just try to keep up.
I know, and the last question that I had, Larry, is, why did you choose to center activism as the public-facing part of your life?
Well, I didn't plan it that way. I was a pretty regular, and I think that's one aspect of this story, one aspect of this book, is that I think it tries to show that an ordinary person can help to build a movement and can help bring about change. I did not come from a political family. I did not come from a family of activists. I don't think any of my family were, to my knowledge, I was a kid, I only know what they told me, but I don't think they were members of the NAACP. My mother was a seamstress. She worked literally around the corner in the Hoffmanizing Cleaners on 16th Avenue. My father was a truck driver who passed away when I was 4 years old. And I wasn't privy to any discussions about race in my family until the night, July 1967, when the rebellion broke out. And we lived in a 3-family house, 3 stories. We had our apartment on the 2nd floor, and we're sitting on the porch, literally watching the rebellion unfold in our part of Newark. Because back then, this was in the 1960s, business was much more decentralized. Almost every avenue was like a business district, like 16th Avenue, shops and stores, shoe stores, clothing stores, all kind of stores. My doctor, this is probably unheard of today. My doctor lived 2 blocks away from us. He lived on 16th Avenue between 10th and 11th. No, he didn't live. His office was on 16th Avenue between, I think, 10th and 11th Street. The grocery store, vegetable store, candy store, laundry, everything was there. Everything was decentralized. So when the rebellion broke out, directly across the street from my house was a dry goods warehouse. The building is still there. It's a bus garage now, but it was a food warehouse. And so we're sitting there and we're watching everything explode up in flames, people running. So I, started talking like, why is this happening? And then they started talking to me, and that was like the first discussion we had about race. And, it had an impact, but, it was like first opening, like of consciousness, like a flower, and it's starting to open. And then the next month, James Brown comes out with his record, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Now, that might not seem like a lot to some people, but in my household, up until 1967, we called each other colored. We didn't even use the word Negro. We were colored people. It's funny because now people use the term people of color, right? Yeah. But back then, we were colored. But James Brown was like, you black, but be proud of it, and the whole Black Power movement that was generated. And I went to high school, and I don't know if people remember Archie comics, but I was kind of like the Black Archie. I had the sweater on with the varsity letter, and dreams of becoming a lawyer. I had classmates who were more political than I was. I had classmates who worked in the Gibson campaign in 1969 and 70. And then all of a sudden, you know, the story, I'm not going to tell the story all over again. The story of the teacher's strike is in there.
Yeah.
And because I was president of student government, I was dragged into that controversy. Because before that, didn't nobody care about the student government. The students didn't even care about student government.
Yeah.
But when they thought we weren't going to graduate because we had missed 35 days of school, then like people like, Larry, what are you going to do about it? You know, because I was the leader of student government at that time. And from that point forward, you know, and then I got appointed to the board and pushed right into the Black Power movement in Newark, because one of the many people probably don't remember or don't know that one of the main aspects of the Black Power movement was not just electing black people, but it was also community control of institutions. And one of the slogans was black community control of our schools, you know, and I was on the school board, so I was in the center of that struggle. So at different points, I was pushed further and further and further into the movement until, you know, it was a part of me. Even when my school board term was over, you know, even after Baraka had given me the African name Adimu Chunga, even after all of that, when my school board term was finally over and I went back to Princeton, I was ready to go. I was exhausted. I was tired. I was glad to be alive, because there were moments when I thought I was going to lose my life, you know, and I just wanted to go to school. You know, I get to Princeton, people are waiting there. They like join our black student organization. The first semester, we want you to give a talk on your experience as a school board, on the school board, and so on and so forth. So, you know, at a certain point, the struggle became like a part of my life, and an inextricable part. Like, even at points where I tried to maybe go in a different direction, because I had a family, I had children, you know, I had dreams at one point being a full-time organizer and all that. I had to go back to work. Bills had to be paid. I had two children at that point, you know. But even then, things kept, Abner Louima, Amadou Diallo, and then Earl Faison. And really from Earl Faison forward, you know, this is it. And now I'm kind of like, as they say in the 2-mile run, on the last lap. You know, there will be no going back. We're going to finish this play to the end, you know, and I'm thankful to Annette that she helped us to chronicle, you know, to get it down on paper, at least some of it. Because even one thing you learn about writing a book, it's not the whole story. Even when the book is done, you know that there was stuff left out, you know.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
true. No. I know. I appreciate all the work that you've done, and again, the book it's very enlightening. I really enjoyed it. It's also a lot of twists and turns too in the book, I will say. I was surprised by some of the things.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I'd hate it to be linear and boring. You know?
It was really good. Okay, well, I think I've taken up a lot of time, so let's kick it over to my fellow journalists from New Jersey Urban News, Anthony Orlando and Kyle Goldware, if you have questions to pose.
Hello.
My name is Kyle Goldware in Jersey News. So my first question is, if you could go back and talk to your younger self, what advice would you give him?
Good question.
That's a real good question. I have regrets. I have some regrets about some things. One of the biggest regrets was that I didn't finish my doctoral work. After the anti-apartheid movement on Princeton's campus, I was invited to be in the doctoral program at Princeton, and I was doing my working on my doctoral work. But, you know, when I went back to Princeton, because I had left, when I was appointed to school board, I left. I was gone for 3 years, came back, graduated, you know, but it was even then, because when I went back to Princeton, I went back married, children, no more track running. I had to work, you know, and go to school and come home. I wasn't permitted to bring my family my first year, my freshman year, because they said, we want to make sure you get through this, you know. And then when I wanted to bring my family, couldn't. There's a lot of stress, and my wife and I separated at that time, and it was very painful, and it was a lot of things. It wasn't just that, but that was a big part. And so I didn't finish my doctoral work. So that's one of the regrets that I have. So if I could talk to my other self, I would probably say finish that doctoral work. But then, you know, this is all conjecture, because had I stayed at Princeton, would I have ended up founding the People's Organization for Progress? You know, maybe I would have stayed at Princeton and had just an academic life, which can be a rich life too. I'm not disparaging academia, you know, but it's a big question if I would have ever returned to Newark, because even as a grad student, I was already teaching at Princeton. I was a TA to Dwayne Lockhart, who taught state and local government, and you know, I think that's how they probably saw me. So that's one thing I probably would have said to finish my doctoral work. That's what I say now, but you know.
Okay. So my next question is, so what do you hope to achieve with your book for the younger generations? So like, you know, what do you hope they would learn from it?
Well, I hope that this book will inspire other young people to get in the struggle for social justice and social transformation. That's absolutely my utmost hope. If this book does that, then it provides a valuable service. Because Fanon said, each generation must realize its historical responsibility, fulfill it or betray it. So my role, I think, at this point is to try to breathe that spirit of revolution into the next generation so that they can continue this struggle. It's very difficult, and I think one of the challenges that faces the movement in this country today, particularly the black movement, is getting more young people involved. But there's more to be said to that, because that's really an oversimplification. You know, one of the riddles that I have been trying to solve for the last 50 years is how to build an ongoing movement that is not solely based on charismatic leadership. I mean, like, why did we create People's Organization for Progress? Why didn't we just join one of the existing organizations that were on the horizon? We created POP because we wanted something more aggressive. Now, I'm not trying to cast aspersions on other organizations, but I have to tell the truth. We wanted something that was more militant. Now, at the same time, we didn't want anything that was crazy that would make people run away from us, but we wanted something that was stronger and was going to push the system in another direction, in a positive direction. And that's why we created People's Organization for Progress. And from that point on, the question was, how do we build something that's going to be ongoing? You know, because the movement ebbs and flows. It's like looking at the ocean and you see waves coming forward. Occupy Wall Street was a wave. Black Lives Matter was a wave. The anti-apartheid movement was another wave. And it's like with each spontaneous uprising, we have to kind of reinvent things for the next spontaneous uprising. What we lack is the organizational apparatus that can go from spontaneous uprising to spontaneous uprising, and yet increasing the strength of the movement at each point. The thing that breaks my heart on the 42nd anniversary of the People's Organization for Progress is that the organization is not larger, is not stronger. Now, I don't say this in any way because I know a lot of pop members don't want me to say these things, right? And these are my opinions. They might say something else, or they will say, I know them, they'll say something else, But Dr. King said in his book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? He said, we must build, and this is a quote, we must build workman-like organizations with compelling power. And that's the challenge. And as far as I'm concerned, my project is unfinished. The professor is giving me back the paper. Mr. Hamm, you have more to do. Your work is not finished yet because you didn't reach that goal.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I think people would beg to differ on that one, though.
Hi, I'm Anthony Orlando. Thank you so much for taking my question. All right, my first one is, what was it like putting your life story to paper, writing this memoir? I mean, was there any struggle just digging up past events in your life and expressing them through your writing?
I know oftentimes when, I'm going to start and I'm going to let him finish, but I know oftentimes when he would come and we sit down and go through it, he would have still been, because he was still working at the time when we first started, he'd be exhausted. He might have gone to work, may have come back from a protest demonstration, whatever, and we'd be sitting at Panera's or somewhere and going through this. And he would be exhausted. Sometimes toward the end when we were going through the pages and I had him reading through what was written, he'd come over back to the house. He'd be exhausted. And I knew it was taking a lot out of him. I think physically, but also emotionally, because it's hard sometimes going back into your life and looking at things, and he talked about some of the regrets, so he's reliving some of that over again. And so you can kind of see the toll kind of as I was going through it, with him. I could see, this was not an easy process for him. Now I'll let him finish, but.
No, that's pretty good. It's painful telling the story of your life. There's a lot in this book, but there are things that are not in the book. And I don't know, there are some things I don't know if they'll ever be in the book. Writing a book, though, makes you take a hard look at yourself. And that's painful. The process of self-evaluation and having the strength to admit your shortcomings or your failures. But also not having a false modesty and not recognizing your achievements, because we have achieved things, I mean, the fact that this little organization, this all-volunteer organization that didn't receive money from corporations, that didn't receive money from the government, that didn't receive money from political parties, has lasted for 42 years. I mean, there's a straight line from 1982 till today. You can go back in 1982, you can read about People's Organization for Progress. I think our first forum was at I think it was Missionary Baptist Church in East Orange, 1982. And here we are. You know, a lifetime can seem like a moment, and a moment can seem like a lifetime. I'm sitting here now, 70 years old, talking about when I was appointed to the Board of Education at 17 years old. But it's like that. You know, what was also painful is the fact that, well, not just painful, but a kind of a revelation that people, I don't think, are really conscious of when they're making history. They're not conscious of it. They're doing a particular thing. And only when you look back, and only with the test of time, can you realize if that's an historical moment. Like, one of the painful things for me was that when I left Princeton, I had so much material. I had to put it in, tuck it away. Probably some of the Newark people know where tuck it away was, down there on Bergen Street. It was a storage place, right? But because I wasn't making a lot of money, I lost my storage lot and lost all the material that was in there. Written speeches, hundreds of articles that had been written, even up until that time. You know, that was pretty painful. So those are just some random thoughts.
Well said. Second question.
Yes.
Having sort of relived your life through this book, what would you say are the most important things you learned in your decades as an activist?
Well, the thing that we opened with, and that was that the struggle for social justice is protracted, whether you're dealing with immediate issues or whether you're dealing with the larger issues. A struggle to get justice for someone who is a victim of police brutality could take 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. You know, so that's a protracted struggle on one level. And then the struggle for civil rights. I mean, look how long it took, how many years it took from the last Civil Rights Act that was written in the 19th century, and the Civil Rights Act, you know, the first one in 1960. Most people forget about the Civil Rights Act in 1960. There was one in 1960, then there was another one in 1964. So the protracted nature of struggle is, of the struggle is one thing. Being consistent is another thing. And I learned this from the people, right? Like, if you ask people about Larry Hamm, they will say one thing. They'll say he was consistent. They say that. So you have to be consistent. And you have to know that people are looking at you. Even if what you're doing is not in the newspaper, it's not on television, people are looking at you. And they're evaluating you, you know, and you have to be conscious of that. So the protracted nature of the struggle, the need to be consistent, the need to be willing to step outside of the box in thought, and also to step outside of the box in action. Like, there were many times, if we had followed the proscribed steps that people said we should follow, we wouldn't have succeeded, you know? But there were other times that, you know, we did the unorthodox thing and that didn't succeed either. So, you know, you have to be flexible. You have to have a certain degree of flexibility, you know. And the other thing is that the struggle does not end. It's not like a movie. It's not like a novel. It's, you know, I mean, this book has an introduction. It has a postscript, but it's ongoing. This fight that we're fighting will be going on after I am gone from the planet Earth. So you have to train other people. And that's another thing. People say, well, you got to train other people. It's not as easy as you think. First of all, there got to be some young people willing to step forward to be trained and be open-minded to accept, you know, whatever you have to offer them.
One thing I want to add to that, too, you spoke of ebbs and flows, and largely movements ebb and flow because people are not consistent, you know. And I mean, I'm using myself as an example in terms of when I got involved with the Earl Faison case. You know, I remember I'm young, I'm thinking, okay, so we're going to be involved and we're going to see this to the end, and, you know, but you're expecting the end to come, you know, within the year or two. You know, I'm in my, 30s or something at that time, or late 20s, 30s. And I'm just thinking, okay, you know, a year, 2 years. It was, by the time those police actually went to prison, it was about 5, 6 years?
4 or 5
4 or
years.
5 years?
Yeah.
It was before they actually saw any time.
Right.
You know? And so, and even, I mean, even then, it was, you know, so part of you is like, okay, so when does this end? And then by the time while that's still going on, something else is popping up. You know, so you start to learn that, oh, this is never going to end.
Right.
This is, and so other things happen in life, you know, and you get pulled away for a moment, and then, you know, then you come back later on when something else happens, and those are the ebbs and flows. But Larry has been consistent straight through. There was no stopping, and it's hard to find people like that.
The other thing is the importance of study, and this is a question that we've been dealing with recently in POP and have dealt with over the years. But it is important that, you know, what people used to call, I don't know if they use the term anymore, but praxis, the unity between theory and practice, that you have to study other movements. If you're building a movement, you should study movements, because you want to avoid mistakes, you know, that other folks have made, or you want to find things that help make them successful and use those things, you know. Like, if one of the things I always have been saying for years, since I discovered it, because I didn't know it, I had to discover it, you know, in my 20s, like the perception of Martin Luther King and the reality of Martin Luther King. Like, there's a popular narrative that's been crafted about Martin Luther King, what he was, what he did, you know, etc. And then there's what he said. And like, King wrote 6 books, numerous sermons and articles. I think most people have not read them, you know, and in some ways, and it's not just because of Martin Luther King, you know. When we speak of people like King and Malcolm X and others, it's really kind of telegraphic language, you know, because there's so much wrapped up in them. But anyone who is trying to build a movement in 21st century America should be reading what Dr. King wrote. Like, should be reading Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community. Anyone trying to build a movement should be reading Malcolm X Speaks, not just the autobiography, not just the story of his life, but read the speeches he gave in 1963 and 1964 and 65 at the end of his life, toward the end of his life, when he, in fact, was beginning to crystallize his own vision for what the Black liberation movement should be like and the direction it should be going. You know, that's so important. You know, read the works of people who were in the anti-colonial struggles in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. You know, it's so important, you know, because number one, you get inspiration from them. You know, it's inspiring to read about other people's revolutions. You know, I know some people might not like to hear that, but it is inspiring, where they overthrew their oppressor, you know? And so that helps to give you some inspiration, but you also learn lessons from their struggles.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Kyle. Now to our Zoom audience. Penda, do we have any questions from Zoom? Okay. Oh, okay. We have another journalist with a question.
Hello.
Hello.
You guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. My name
Munir?
is Munira.
Munira.
I work for PSA, Public Square Amplified. I've been with you guys a full month now. Anyway, I wanted to ask, what's the People's Organization of Progress's relationship with the local, state, and national Democratic Party?
People's Organization for Progress is a grassroots organization. It is not a political party. Its members are members of different organizations and political parties. Now, I have to say this, it's no secret POP is a predominantly black organization, although not exclusively black organization, and many black people are Democrats, are in the Democratic Party. Right now, I'm a registered Democrat because I'm running in the Democratic primary for United States Senate. But there are people in POP who are not Democrats. In fact, I would probably say there are a number of people in POP who see themselves as independents. We might have had a few black Republicans at one time, but I think they left. I think it was a bit much for them, But to give more insight, POP supported Jesse Jackson's run for president in 1984 and in 1988. In fact, I was the state co-chairman of the Jackson campaign of 1988, and Jesse Jackson was running in the Democratic presidential primary. There was more of a consensus for the Jackson campaigns of '88. With Barack Obama, it's a little different, Of course, it goes without saying, the vast majority of black people supported Barack Obama's first presidential campaign, and to a great degree, the second presidential campaign. But there was a lot of debate in POP about the Obama campaign, because POP, while not embracing a particular ideology, is certainly anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist. You can see that, like, if you read the preamble of the Constitution of People's Organization for Progress, which is in the book. I didn't know Annette put the preamble in the book. I'll go through the book today. I'm like, oh, the preamble, But if you read the preamble, you can see the anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist spirit of it. So when President Obama ran, it was intense debate. I remember one night, this very nice young, I can't remember her name, young black teacher from East Orange, New Jersey. She was like, I think, the county coordinator for the Obama campaign. She said, Mr. Hamm, I want to come and speak to Pop about Barack Obama campaign, because she figured, if there was anywhere she could speak to, it would be at the People's Organization for Progress. And she came and she spoke, and I felt so sorry for that young lady, because there were people who were critical of Obama, who knew something about him, how he ran against Bobby Rush, who had been a member of the Black Panther Party that had gotten elected to Congress in Chicago. There was a lot of understanding about the nature of imperialism and, the role of the president, and all of that. So it took us a long time to finally, it was a lot of debate and a lot of internal discussion, but finally, probably around late September, early October of that year that he was running, we endorsed him. And just yesterday I was somewhere and somebody was telling me, oh, Brother Hamm, I was on your bus when you took people, on Pop's bus when you took people down to Washington for Obama's inauguration. You know, I was doing an interview with Basiram Chawi yesterday at Manhattan News Network in New York, and he was saying him and his wife and his kids were on our bus because we took a bunch of buses, you know, down. So, so that gives you some insight. Like there's no formal relationship, but it gives you some insight. Now, we supported Bernie Sanders. When Bernie Sanders ran for president, we supported Bernie Sanders' run in 2016. I was a delegate to the Democratic National Committee. Remember, Bernie Sanders was an independent. But why did he run in the Democratic primary? Because he knew that he would reach more people that way. He was an independent from Vermont. Independent means he ran in the general election and he defeated the Democrat and the Republican. He's one of two. I think we have two independent senators. I think King from Maine is an independent, and I think Bernie Sanders is an independent. So we supported, you know, Bernie Sanders, but Sanders ran in the Democratic primary.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, these are great questions so far. Are we good on time? That's
Is it time?
is it, what time? 6 to 11?
Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to have to go
yeah,
now.
okay.
I will
Well-
leave it to Annette.
Yeah, well, I do want to say I'm
Okay.
immensely grateful for your time.
Thank you.
And speaking with me and telling us your story and sharing your story with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
We really appreciate you.
Thank
coming
you.
out.
Thank you very much. And let me say once again, I leave you in the hands of Annette Alston, to whom I will be eternally grateful.
I'm grateful to you for allowing me to do it
In this book. Thank you.
and saying
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you so much.
I have to speak to a group of folks in Somerset, New Jersey, and you know, I can't be late.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, Annette, now it's just us two ladies, two journalists, to end this evening on International Women's Day, too. I don't know if there are any questions from the audience. If anybody has any questions. I know I have questions, but... Oh, Zoe, okay.
So, female writer to female writer, I guess.
Yes.
I was very curious about what initially attracted you to the subject, what got you like hooked, because writing a book is no joke. Like it's
No.
tough, it takes a long time, and I know it's, you know, titled about struggle, but I'm more curious about the flip side of that and like what were kind of the smaller victories or the smaller moments of joy that, I mean, I know he's not here anymore, well, he's on his way out, but that kept Lawrence going through his career and also kept you going through with this entire process of writing the book.
Okay, so first it was just, the first step was just getting him to say yes. And I was happy he was open to doing this. And what got me through was understanding that really it wasn't just his story. You know, yes, it was his story. It's about the struggle, about organizing, but it's also about all the people that helped in that. People whose names would never be known or mentioned outside of this book.
Yeah.
So this book was an opportunity to talk about some of the unsung heroes in this and tell their stories along with Larry's, because really, in order to have a movement, in order to have an organization like POP, you have to have the people willing to do the hard work.
Yeah.
And who see the vision and want and understand the importance of a sustained movement, a sustained action. And the people in this book were those people that were mentioned. And you know, some of them, you know, you'll see in some chapters, some of them were there in the beginning or there through certain phases, and then they kind of faded out, but then other people stood up and took on the mantle and marched forward. So, and all of that is important, you know, all of that is important to understanding that, you know, it's not just one person It's not about one person.
Yeah.
It's about the collective.
Yeah. Are there any other questions from the audience? I mean, I know I have a question, so I will just ask it, okay? Well, like Zoe said, like, I mean, writing a book, that's like no easy feat. I know, like, I mean, I've tried. I struggle. And I'm wondering, like, what is the most valuable piece of advice you've been given about writing that has helped you? How do you do it?
You know, when I started this, I was working full time. Larry was working full time. And I was involved in a lot of different things. One of the things is just making up your mind that, you know, you're going to do it and setting aside time to do exactly what needs to be done in order to get it done. So, had to do that. You know, creating that outline. And then the research. And the research was fun, you know, because you have to, even though Larry is telling the story, you have to research what we're talking about.
Yeah.
For one thing, you know, he may not remember everything. So it's good to research, you know, create that timeline, and then, you know, do the research and everything that goes with it so that you can jar his memory with certain things, you know, and, you know, I read this about this. Do you remember this? What happened here? You know, so, and especially with the Faison case, I was going through various periodicals and everything and just really researching and finding out what was going on with that. The easiest chapter to do was actually the one on the Newark Board of Education, because I largely used his thesis. So, I mean, his thesis was thorough. It was comprehensive. It had everything in it. And so that was really easy, you know, in terms of the research and everything, and all the information that was in there. He would have surely have forgotten had it not already been, you know, in place there. So that made that easier. And it, you know, just understanding what kept me going through the process was wanting to see it come to completion, understanding the importance of what I was doing. And so that dogged determination to say, look, this has got to get done, you know, let's make this happen. And so, you know, working with Larry, having good people that I could reach out to, confidants and stuff like that, that helped me to stay focused, or, you know, okay, you know, this is what you need to be looking at. Did you consider this? You know, so that was very helpful.
Yeah, because I will say, like, it is very well researched, because it's like a, I don't know, I consider it like almost like a historical account. And like before, when you were saying, like, it's more than just Larry, it's like just like all like the collective. And there are a lot of names that come up in the book, you know, like. And
I know I probably missed some, and I think that's one of Larry's fears in this, is that, you know, who did we miss in this? You know. But we put down as many names as we could possibly, you know, squeeze in there. But that is the challenge, you know, trying to get everyone in there that did something and meant something to the movement. There are a lot of names in there.
Yeah, there are.
So if they don't get heard anywhere else, if they don't get mentioned anywhere else, they're in this book.
Names and organizations too.
Right.
I know it's like the list of organizations. I don't know if there's any other questions from the audience. This has been quite the evening. I really appreciate you coming out. I've learned so much. I want to invite up Kyle to close us out. Oh yeah, sorry.
Firstly, I would just like to thank everyone who came out tonight, everyone in the crowd right now, everyone who came on Zoom. I would really like to thank you all. We journalists, we must be grounded in history, and we need to know the historical context of everything. And we need to spread that truth to everybody who doesn't know that. It is incredibly important, and it must be shared. I would like to thank Annette. I would also like to thank Lawrence Hamm. And happy Women's History Month, and happy International Women's Day.
Thank you. I didn't have my glasses on, but I noticed a friend back there I haven't seen in years. One of my schoolmates. I love you too, girl. From elementary school up, we've been friends. Wow. Yep.
All right, well, that concludes our evening. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. Thank you.
Thank you.